our beloved Slovenian skier, Primoz Roglic, has conquered his fourth Vuelta España in 2024 at the tender age of 35, equaling the record of former doper and former low-cost Lance teammate Roberto Heras, and thus becoming the best cyclist in the history of this competition. However, he's done it by lying to cycling fans, with a scandal on a par with the great successes of the doped 90s, one which leaves us with a horrible feeling in the pits of our stomachs. The same feeling we have when we see that 6 teams have shared 90% of the stages of this sorry Vuelta España, with stages in supermarkets and dogs crossing each other in the middle of the road without control, and a false whiny leader with whom the Red Bull team champion played with like a cat with a ball of wool until he was finally ready to put on a show in the last days of the race. This is how Roglic won his 4th red jersey. Subscribe to the channel for more videos after the Vuelta, and also follow us on our Twitter account @UncleCycling, and then you can keep up with the latest cycling news. And now, let's have a closer look at the tactics of Roglic en route to becoming the best rider in Grand Tour history. After a complicated year packed with crashes where he could only win the Criterium Dauphiné, the Slovenian was presented as the main favourite for the Vuelta España, along with the hard-working João Almeida of the Saunier Duval team. We quickly saw that number 61 was going to be head and shoulders above the rest, already from the first day. In a horrible time trial on a highway in Oeiras, he was the best of the candidates for the GC of this Vuelta. And while Roglic positioned himself amongst the first, Almeida and Saunier Duval began to relax, being Saunier Duval, with Moonlight Machin taking pictures with the Portuguese director who doped his riders with menotropin, and returning to the damnable COVID-19 as an excuse for the sudden illness of his riders, as happened to Almeida in the first week of the Vuelta. In those hot climbs, Roglic took full advantage, taking his first 2 stage wins on the first 2 high finishes in Andalusia, the first of them against a guy who was sanctioned by his own team for doping, and the second against the man who would turn out to be his biggest rival, as happened in the 2021 edition, the attacker who never attacks, Enric Mas. However, in between, the Slovenian hatched a plan to try to fool the audience into thinking that he was going to suffer to win this Vuelta, and he decided to give the red jersey to another rider, something he himself declared in front of the cameras just hours before it happened. And he couldn't have made a better choice, because some hungry fans gobbled up the clickbait. The complainer Ben O'Connor was the best possible bait, and Roglic, who didn't put his teammates to work that day, let the Australian Netflix star gain more than 5 minutes on the general classification on one of the best stages of this Vuelta. And so while the casino team rider climbed atop the podium and attended to the press and suffered like the limited climber he is on the very few high mountains of this edition of the Vuelta, Roglic gradually, without suffering too much, except on the beautiful stage of the Azayanas, where Richard Carapaz put him in trouble by attacking 88 kilometers from the finish line, he was cutting seconds from the false leader day after day. And he was there each and every time on the high finishes, the best of the favourites for the general classification. Neither the dinosaur Mikel Landa, nor the promising Carlos Rodriguez, nor the king of the minions, nor even the attacker Enric Mas could get to the same level of the Slovenian, who, whenever he wanted, stepped on the accelerator of his specialised bike, costing 17,000 euros by the way, to piss in the long-suffering faces of his mediocre rivals. That's why this Vuelta was the worst of all the Grand Tours this year, by far. And if you don't believe me, there's a thread on our official Twitter that explains in detail why we hold this strangely unpopular opinion. But let's have a closer look at this historic pissing by the Slovenian skier. You see, in the great moments of cycling history, like the Flèche Wallonne triplet, like the Roubaix triplet, or like the triplets that Roglic himself did in the Rabobank team at Paris-Nice, it all comes down to trios. So Red Bull got in on the action by launching an attack of 3 riders in the last week of the last Grand Tour of the year at the Mon Calvillo airport. There was Daddy Martinez, fuming. There was the man without nationality, Mr. Vlasov, who made the displays of Castrillo when he blew him apart days earlier look even more histrionic. And obviously, there was Roglic, who was now only 5 seconds behind the whining big baby O'Connor. With 5 kilometres to go, the Slovenian was left alone, and he imposed an impressive pace, pulverising his own record of 4 years earlier. Oh, those great improvements in nutrition and materials in just 1,300 days. That's what goes to make these miracles in sport. It goes to make them more rotten than ever. The red jersey lost almost 2 minutes that day, further enhancing this exhibition typical of the times of Aitor Gonzalez or Eras himself, whom Roglic surpassed with this victory. But of course, there was still the last mountain stage. Would anyone dare to attack the Red Bull team there? The team of dopers Rolf Aldag and Pachi Villa gave their rivals every possible opportunity, with a legendary display that immediately reminded us of the Once team, packed with dopers in the 1996 Vuelta España, with Alex Zuller as the only survivor of an alleged food poisoning incident in a hotel. Suddenly, Daddy Martinez, who'd blown the peloton apart hours earlier, and his Austrian teammate, Adalas, Patrick Gamper, well, they abandoned on the first climb of the day. There was the man without a nationality, Mr. Vlasov, who had also been part of the shuttle at Mon Calvillo. He was left behind with the sprinters, and the domestique Nico Denz spent the entire stage holding the red light, missing the control by 56 seconds, and ending up crying on his own Twitter to receive pats on the back for something that we could all see was not normal. And worst of all, his team blatantly lied, as Sergio Palamonte of Ciclismo 2005 explained to us, with press releases saying that the team had suffered a salmonella outbreak in the hotel the day before they'd flown into Mon Calvillo. And even a member of the staff, the press officer who was supposed to give explanations, Stephanie Constant, she ended up in hospital. A lie with which they laugh at the fans, since in Spain it's mandatory to declare if there are any outbreaks of this disease in order to protect other patients in a hospital or allow people to close and isolate hotels. And there were no traces in any hospitals of a disease, one which at 20 degrees is laughable that it occurs in the first place. However, despite the Red Bull casualties, no one dangerous attacked Roglic. There was a new triumph for Eddie Dunbar, a rider with a strange position on the bike, with no World Tour victories until this disgusting Vuelta, and now he leaves with 2. The reason? It was obvious. There were 3 riders who kept up a spectacular pace. The Spaniard Roger Adria, who had already had a very bad time on the early stages. There was the anti-Pogacar Lipovic, who was now playing for the white jersey. And of course the leader, who was later told to put on a mask on the podium, while Adria commented that the dinner that had made some of his teammates sick, it was just like Once in 1996. And he said that they'd all eaten the same food, unlike Zuller, who was intolerant to certain foods, and that's why he was saved. And all this in a team sponsored by a cooking company, one which hires a cook who triggers an outbreak of salmonella. And if this dodgy cutlet excuse wasn't bad enough, what does it say about the sport and how sad that the majority of fans are eager to swallow in 2024 the reasoning behind these pendulous performances? Oh, it's vomitous. Maybe that's something I ate earlier too. On the last day, Roglic just rode around Madrid, while Stefan Kung gave the FDJ team its first Grand Tour stage win, and the whiny O'Connor, he held on to second place against an ineffective and bordering on useless Enric Mas, a 4th Grand Tour podium, all in the Vuelta España. The video game cyclist, Jay Vine, he was king of the mountains. Caden Groves, with 0 wins in the Giro, here swept to 3 victories, taking the green jersey. And the doped as a 15-year-old Dane, because he's always a Dane, Skjelmose Jensen, he was the best young rider of this Vuelta. An absolute disgrace of a race won by a rider who's won his last 2 Grand Tours with a doped teammate in one and with several teammates shitting their pants in another. Put that in the history books. Oh, stop by the video on the screen. You're sure to love it.